the Chinese have a trust problem in India, not just at the level of government, but at the level of society.
Maybe we need to look at these things in a broader historical context.
Ashok, these bilateral issues apart, there's also seems to be a race for influence and resources going on between India and China and Africa. Who's winning the race and how? And where exactly is India placed?
China is way ahead.
Where?
If you look at, I was there for the BRICS summit earlier this year. I'd gone for the academic forum, track 2, which preceded the actual summit. And it was fairly clear that Chinese influence in South Africa, which is of course one of the economic powerhouses of Africa, and Africa as a whole, was way ahead of India. In fact, to the extent that even getting South Africa into BRICS, which South Africa does not really belong to, because BRICS was supposed to be the $1 trillion strong emerging economies. South Africa's economy is about $330 or $350 million. It's not nowhere close to $1 trillion. But it wanted to get in. China helped it get in. And once it got in, it's become the sort of cat's paw for China. And it is said that in response, it has ended up helping scuttle IPSA, which was the India, Brazil, South Africa grouping, which was spearheaded by India as a sort of emerging democracies. So Chinese influence in Africa is way ahead of India's. It's not as if Indian companies don't want to invest, but investing in, if you talk to Indian companies, investing in countries with sort of volatile political systems, whether it's in the Middle East or in Africa, requires a certain amount of financial support, counter guarantees and political support from the Indian system, from the government. The Chinese have no problem doing that because all of that comes under one monolithic state-controlled system. In India, it becomes very difficult because you put a guarantee of X amount, and if somebody loses the amount, you have the CEJ filing a report, and the next day Tehelka does a cover story of that. So that's how we operate, and which is why we actually lose out. So a lot of bold, sometimes risky, sometimes entrepreneurial calls, which we have to take, we don't end up taking. Frankly, that is a problem we face.
So there's like the way India usually complains about the China's hegemonistic aspirations and other things. The India's approach to diplomacy vis-a-vis our immediate neighborhood is also, they also talk of us in the same tone. So why do you think that we are not able to get our act together in our immediate neighborhood? And why there's this intense anti-India thing festering in all in our immediate neighborhood, at least?
Long years ago, when I was serving in Pakistan, one of my Canadian colleagues was getting transferred back. He was going back to Ottawa. And you might remember Mr. Rajendra Sarin, he used to run public opinion trends. Knew a great deal on Pakistan. We were all having lunch together in our house in Islamabad. And Rajendra Sarin said to the Canadian colleague, well, we would like to have the kind of relationship that the United States and Canada has, very friendly, good neighborly and so on. He said, who told you that? He said, we have huge problems with the Americans. And at that time, acid rain was a major problem. This is long 25 years ago I'm talking about. Therefore, all smaller neighbors have problems with bigger neighbors. I don't think that by itself should be a cause of worry. And in regard to what you're saying, about hegemony and so on. 2 years ago, I think it was, that we had a dialogue, non-official dialogue with Sri Lanka. And as a matter of very fortunate and happy coincidence, the then Minister of Finance of Sri Lanka was also there, and he led the delegation. And during one of our informal chats, he said to me, he said, Indians are far more generous than the Chinese. The Chinese give us only $30 million by way of grant. The rest is all loan for which we have to repay, for which we have to pay interest. India gives us $1 billion. This is what the difference between the Indians and the Chinese is. That the Chinese come and sign a contract, in 6 months the road, port, whatever it may be, is ready. He says with India, 6 months we are not even discussing the DPR, the detailed project report. So, it takes a long time. So visibly, India is not there in the same way in which China is. although we are far more generous. We've given $1 billion to Bangladesh, $1 billion to Sri Lanka, more than $1 billion to Afghanistan. I'm sure we'll be quite willing to commit monies to Pakistan in case the new government could be, in a position to want that kind of relationship with India. What I'm saying is that it's not that we are not generous. We are. But just as we are not able to get our act together within India, we are not able to get our act together outside India. And this is something that everybody should worry about, because in a big way this hegemony etc. comes from that. Of course, if you go back in history, then there was a phase, you remember one of our former prime ministers saying, even small Bhutan is making eyes at us. Now, there was a certain thinking of that kind. That is no longer so. I think in the last 10 years, things have changed. Government of India is far more responsive to our neighbors. But we have to be able to deliver, not simply promise. Once we start delivering, you will find that this, whatever residual feeling there is of this side, that will probably go away.
So Ashok, I just wanted to ask you like a follow-up question to that. Like the ambassador said, we pumped in a lot of money into our immediate neighborhood, and we have long historical ties with a lot of our neighbors. But as Brijesh was mentioning, there is this feeling of that, especially in Nepal, Burma, Sri Lanka, that yes, India is there. We like India. We've had long ties with India, but we'd rather go with China for the time being. Why do you feel that's there?
I don't think they want to go with China. They may have problems with India, but I don't think they necessarily want to go with China. As Mr. Rangachari pointed out, many of these countries have big economic gaps, essentially infrastructure gaps. Ports, railroads, electricity, and so on. And they look to a bigger partner to come and help build these. Now, our record in building infrastructure in our country is terrible. We can't do it in another country. We've been trying to build a parliament building in Afghanistan for a decade now. Is it complete? I'm not even sure yet. Okay. So, Hambantota port was offered to us by President Rajapakse. We hemmed and hawed. He mentioned the Chinese went and built the port, and it's there.
Yeah.
Now, the Chinese are building railroads across Asia, across Central Asia, across in Nepal, in Bangladesh. We haven't really expanded our railroad network since the British left. I mean, it's very incremental expansion. So we have huge, capacity constraints, which we need to address ourselves. A big political or strategic doctrine for our neighborhood for the past 10 odd years has been that as the Indian economy grows, there is an interest and an appeal that is created around the Indian economy, and our neighboring countries see it in their benefit to do business with either individual states which are part of India, neighboring states like Punjab to Punjab or Bengal to Bangladesh, or maybe Sri Lanka to Tamil Nadu in a good time, or even between the two Kashmirs perhaps. And either that or the Indian economy as a whole becomes so important that we can all benefit from it. Now, this is a good doctrine to sell when your economy is growing at 8.5%. When it starts growing at 5.5%, it becomes problematic. And your neighbors also recognize that.
Yeah.
Second, we in India, especially in Delhi, seem to have this very smug and complacent and maybe even naive belief that that lines on the map that have been drawn centuries ago by a cartographer in Europe will be respected for all times to come. So we believe that South Asia is our domain and the Chinese are an extra-regional power, and the Indian Ocean is here and the Pacific Ocean is here, and they're two separate regions, and we have no interest in the Pacific Ocean and the Chinese have no interest in the Indian Ocean, and they will respect that because there's a line drawn in the water. But that is not how it works. The Chinese are coming into South Asia. Whether you recognize it or whether you accept it or like it or not, they are coming in. They're coming into Sri Lanka, they're coming into the Maldives, they're coming into Pakistan and POK, as he said, as part of their security arrangement in Xinjiang and Tibet. They're coming into Bangladesh, they're coming into Nepal, they're there. You have got to increase your not just your naval capacity but also your political risk-taking capacity to actually move into East Asia, to look at a deeper relationship with, say, Vietnam or some of the ASEAN countries, not ASEAN as a collective, because ASEAN as a collective is divided, but with some ASEAN countries who will do business with you, make not just the Indian Ocean but the Indo-Pacific, which includes the South China Sea, a part of your strategic domain and thinking.
I want to quickly add a statistic to the point that was being made by Mr. Malik just now. 2002, when Hu Jintao took over, at that time the Chinese economy was 1.2 trillion. When Hu Jintao debuted office last year, it was 8 trillion plus. So in a matter of 10 years, and the last 2 to 3 years of that 10 years was all this financial crisis, etc. and so on. The Chinese economy grew more or less, at an average rate of around 10% plus. So therefore the point that you're making is extremely valid. That if you're growing at 5%, people will look at you in a certain way. If you're growing at 8%, they will look at you differently.
Ashok, one last question. Premier Lee has stressed on pushing trade and economic development as a method to push development in the two countries. How do you think we can balance the present trade deficit that's drastically in favor of China?
India, what can India export realistically? It's IT services and pharmaceuticals. We have very little else which we can export to China, which China already does not have. We can export textiles, we can export automobile components to some degree, but China has capacities in both of those. Those individual sort of segments they may not. I'm not worried about the deficit as such. Deficits, you have deficits with some countries and you don't have deficits with some countries, depending on your economic needs and whether they're fulfilled. It's a question of what you're buying from China. Are you only buying cheap toys, or cheap keyboards which you throw away in 3 months, or are you buying quality power and telecom equipment which can actually serve you and serve your people? I think that is the more important question. And are you assured of reliability, of quality, and of usage of that equipment, even in periods of political tension? That is the more important question to ask.
Thank you very much, Ashok, Avalok and Ambassador Rangachari, for this highly informed debate in the Correspondents.